At exactly 18:10 on the 7th of May 2026, the lead pilot felt his F-16 Fighting Falcon vibrate slightly as the F-110 engine roared to life behind him. Nearly 29,000 pounds of thrust pinned him hard against his seat, propelling the fighter jet down the runway. That evening, 20 US F-16s sequentially lifted off the tarmac at Udeid Air Base in Qatar, accelerating and pulling their noses up into the night sky. The formation rapidly climbed to an altitude of 32,000 feet, heading north across the Persian Gulf, their crosshairs set on the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas. The ground crews standing on the flight line had no idea they were witnessing the dawn of one of the most complex long-range aerial strike campaigns ever launched from Al Udeid. Before we proceed, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Type 9 if you stand with the United States, type 1 if you back Iran, and if you're just here for world peace, type 5. Alright, strap in. Let's head into the combat zone. The lead F-16 was armed with two 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDAMs. These GPS-guided smart bombs are capable of penetrating heavily reinforced concrete bunkers before detonating. The wingmen carried 1,000-pound GBU-32 JDAMs, perfectly suited for taking out fuel depots, hangars, and logistics facilities within the port complex. Behind him, 18 other F-16s flew with identical payload configurations. Every pilot in the cockpit knew they were pushing their aircraft to the absolute limits of its maximum takeoff weight and operational range. The conformal fuel tanks, or CFTs, mounted snugly along the spine of the F-16s, held an additional 900 gallons of JP-8 jet fuel, drastically extending their combat radius. In a standard configuration, an F-16 has a combat radius of roughly 340 miles, but when combined with CFTs, external drop tanks, and mid-air refueling, it can execute strike missions over 750 miles away and return to base safely. As the formation punched through 25,000 feet, the military-grade GPS-aided inertial navigation system on the lead F-16 began calculating the optimal flight path to Bandar Abbas. This system boasts a margin of error of just a few feet, even if the enemy attempts to jam satellite signals. Launching from a secure base deep within Qatari territory, rather than from easily monitored forward operating locations, left Iran with absolutely no early warning. By the time their coastal radar networks detected the incoming strike package, the F-16s would already be practically on top of them. At 18:26, the flight lead leveled off at cruising altitude and adjusted his heading north across the Persian Gulf. Ahead of them lay hundreds of miles of airspace, potentially monitored by Iranian radar. A complex aerial refueling operation stood between them and a target that many military analysts believed was well out of reach for fighters taking off from Qatar. But there was a catch. Even with massive external tanks, 20 F-16s carrying maximum weapons payloads over such an extreme distance made fuel consumption incredibly sensitive. If the mid-air refueling didn't go exactly according to plan within the first 90 minutes, the entire formation would be forced to abort, or worse, flame out and ditch into the Persian Gulf. By 1938, the lead pilot was glued to his fuel gauge. The numbers ticked down precisely, almost perfectly matching the mission planner's calculations. But all those calculations assumed zero margin for error. After an hour and a half of flight time, his F-16 was still burning jet fuel at the predicted rate. However, on a sortie like this, there is no room for deviation. If they didn't get a visual on the tankers in the next few minutes, the whole strike package would have to turn back to Al Udeid, bringing their live ordnance home with them. That was an outcome nobody in those cockpits wanted to see. Just as the flight lead was about to make the tough call, 4 U.S. Air Force Boeing KC-135 Stratotankers materialized ahead of them, holding a steady track at 35,000 feet. The boom operators in the back were prepping for one of the most high-stakes aerial refueling missions of their careers. Each F-16 needed between 3,000 and 3,500 pounds of fuel, just enough to push to Bandar Abbas, drop their payloads, and make it back to friendly airspace. They didn't have a single second to waste. The rigid refueling boom extending from the tail of the KC-135 can offload jet fuel at a staggering rate of nearly 1,000 gallons per minute. That flow rate is fast enough to top off multiple fighters in rapid succession without loitering in the danger zone for too long. Each tanker carried over 90,000 pounds of transferable fuel and could stay on station for hours on end. But for this specific mission, everything had to be fast, precise, and flawless. A delay of just a few minutes could trigger the collapse of the entire operation. Initiating his approach to the tanker formation, the flight lead radioed in. He gently coaxed his fully loaded, 37,000-pound F-16 Fighting Falcon into the contact position, sliding up right behind the lead tanker. Both aircraft were flying straight and level at approximately 300 knots. Flying in such tight formation meant every microscopic stick input had to be dead on. It was basically high-altitude surgery. In the back of the Boeing tanker, the boom operator lay prone in the viewing pod at the tail end of the aircraft. From that vantage point, he manipulated the long metal boom, slowly guiding it toward the aerial refueling receptacle on the spine of the F-16. The hydraulic flight controls allowed him to refine his movements down to the fraction of an inch. Even the slightest variation in airspeed, altitude, or heading could instantly break the connection. In a worst-case scenario, the boom could strike the fighter's fuselage, violently destabilizing both aircraft. Throughout the process, the boomer had to constantly compensate for turbulence, the oscillations of both planes, and the intense aerodynamic forces created when two massive machines traveling at hundreds of miles per hour try to link up in mid-air. "Contact!" The voice crackled over the radio network as the boom nozzle locked securely into the F-16's receptacle with a distinct metallic clank. Over the next 3 minutes, roughly 3,200 pounds of JP-8 poured from the tanker into the fighter jet, while both crews maintained absolute formation discipline. Without this aerial refueling capability, US F-16s staging out of Udeid Air Base in Qatar would be restricted to a combat radius of just 340 to 370 miles. That would place numerous strategic Iranian targets, including the port of Bandar Abbas, completely out of reach. But with mid-air refueling, the strike package's combat radius ballooned to over 750 miles, giving them the legs to punch deep into hostile territory and make it back home. This also meant that not a single Iranian logistics hub in the Persian Gulf region could consider itself safe. As the final F-16 disconnected from the last tanker, the entire strike force crossed the point of no return. At 21:45, the Iranian coastline painted on their forward-looking infrared sensors. The port of Bandar Abbas was operating business as usual. Container cranes were moving, cargo ships were docked, and logistics yards bustled under the amber glow of the harbour lights. Nobody on the ground had a clue that over 40 precision-guided munitions were inbound at supersonic speeds. At exactly 22:10, the final target materialized on the sensor displays. The Bandar Abbas port complex, sprawling along the coast of the Persian Gulf, stood out vividly on thermal imaging. Massive gantry cranes, logistics warehouses, fuel storage tanks, and a pier system stretching for over a mile made this one of Iran's most critical strategic shipping hubs. The AN/AAQ, 2 Lightning targeting pods slung under each F-16 were working in overdrive. The pod's gimbal system can rotate 360 degrees, maintaining a hard lock on the target, even as the aircraft pulls aggressive 5 to 6G combat maneuvers. The flare easily pierced the pitch-black night, while the high-magnification TV cameras allowed the pilots to scrutinize target details from dozens of miles away. Through the lens of his targeting pod, the lead pilot quickly confirmed they were at the right address. Military warehouses were deliberately mixed in with the port's commercial facilities. Several buildings featured reinforced roofs and heavy-duty cooling systems, telltale signatures of bunkers housing highly sensitive military hardware. Colossal fuel tanks near the main pier held millions of gallons of diesel to power the port's operations, but if they took a hit from a few 2,000-pound bunker busters, they would vaporize into a massive fireball visible from miles away. According to US intelligence, the lion's share of Iranian drone components, military electronics, and strategic military supplies in the region flowed straight through these facilities. That made Bandar Abbas a vital logistical choke point in Iran's entire supply chain across the Persian Gulf. At that very moment, two massive container ships were moored at the main pier. Their crews were blissfully unaware that a fighter squadron was bearing down on them from the dark skies above, and they had about 60 seconds left before the first bombs started raining down. Around the warehouses, armed Iranian sentries could be seen patrolling the perimeter. They were guarding what they believed to be a secure logistics hub, completely out of range of any airstrikes originating from Qatar. But miles above their heads, 20 American F-16s were rolling in hot, and the countdown had already begun. The Iranians were about to get a violent reality check. Once the flight lead tallied the target visually through his canopy, he instantly called the signal to commence the attack. He banked his F-16 Fighting Falcon hard and dropped into a steep 25 to 30-degree dive, putting his nose directly on the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas. Belly-mounted, the lightning pod was furiously crunching data. The system's computer updated target coordinates in real time, automatically factoring in crosswinds, airspeed, and atmospheric conditions, ensuring the JDAM would find its mark with pinpoint, sub-meter accuracy. The first 2,000-pound GBU, 3-1 JDAM, was hot and ready to drop. In just 60 seconds, a precision-guided bomb would slam into Bandar Abbas, serving as a brutal reminder to Iranian forces of exactly why assuming America's Udeid Air Base was too far away for a rapid response was a fatal strategic miscalculation. At 22:23, the flight lead's first GBU, 3-1 JDAM, scored a direct hit on the main container gantry crane at Bandar Abbas. This 2,000-pound warhead isn't just a heavy bomb, it's a precision demolition tool engineered specifically to annihilate hardened structures. Its hardened steel penetrator nose can punch through more than 6 feet of reinforced concrete before its 950-pound tritonal explosive payload detonates deep inside the target. The towering crane, built to hoist shipping containers weighing tens of tons, folded like cheap tin as the blast wiped out its primary load-bearing structures. But that was merely the opening salvo. Every 15 seconds, another JDAM found its mark with ruthless, mathematical precision. Each strike was meticulously deconflicted and timed to maximize devastation while preventing blast fragmentation from knocking subsequent bombs off course. The second wave targeted the port's fuel depot. 6 massive above-ground tanks holding tens of thousands of gallons of maritime diesel. The GBU, 3-1's penetrating design, focused the blast energy straight into the tank walls, shredding the thick steel plating before igniting a monstrous fireball that climbed hundreds of feet into the night sky over the Persian Gulf. The third and fourth strikes slammed into the primary logistics warehouses, where Iran's military hardware and strategic supplies were stored. Each 2,000-pound warhead carried an explosive yield equivalent to over 900 pounds of TNT, more than enough to obliterate reinforced concrete walls and trigger secondary detonations of any munitions stored inside. Seconds later, massive secondary explosions began ripping through the compound. Fuel drums, military gear, and highly combustible materials cooked off one by one, fueling a violent chain reaction. Down on the ground, Iranian forces finally realized what was happening. Through his targeting pod, the lead pilot watched heat signatures scrambling wildly between the burning buildings. Some guards wildly fired their rifles into the sky, while others screamed frantically into their radios. But cruising between 32,000 and 35,000 feet, the American F-16s were utterly immune to small arms fire and light anti-aircraft artillery set up around the perimeter. Iran's long-range surface-to-air missile batteries were primarily deployed to protect major population centers and top-tier strategic bases, not this commercial port facility, a facility they firmly believed was untouchable by fighter jets flying out of Qatar. The systematic dismantling continued as the 5th through 8th strikes pummeled the pier infrastructure. Each JDAM was programmed with hyper-accurate GPS coordinates, zeroing in on the crucial joints connecting the pier pilings to the main deck. As these critical structural nodes were severed, massive sections of the pier violently collapsed into the water. Even if the cranes had survived, offloading cargo from ships to the docks had just been rendered physically impossible. By 22:37, a mere 4 minutes after the opening shot, a massive chunk of Bandar Abbas was fully paralyzed. Massive concrete fortifications built to withstand severe Persian Gulf storms and direct cargo ship impacts were reduced to smoking rubble by modern precision-guided munitions. Even if Iran could somehow repair the damage, they no longer possessed the container cranes, fuel reserves, or intact piers required to handle large-scale shipping operations anytime soon. But Iran's logistical network isn't just about shuffling weapons through seaports. They've also built industrial complexes and military production lines inland, allowing for localized assembly, storage, and distribution. And those facilities, nestled deeper inland, were next on the target list for the F-16 flight carving through the night sky. By 22:42, with pillars of fire from Bandar Abbas still raging in their rearview mirrors, 4 US F-16 Fighting Falcons broke off to line up for the next attack run. From the air, this next objective didn't look menacing or even vaguely resemble a high-value military target. It appeared to be nothing more than a large industrial concrete plant situated a few miles inland from the port. But according to US intelligence, this was a critical high-value target that had to be neutralized. To the average person, dropping precision-guided smart bombs on a cement factory sounds like using a sledgehammer to swat a fly. However, intel analysis proved this facility was far from ordinary. Iranian military engineers had quietly retrofitted the plant to manufacture ultra-high-strength concrete. This specialized concrete utilized proprietary additives to construct bunker walls and subterranean facilities capable of shrugging off conventional bombing runs. For the past 2 years, multiple underground arsenals, command centers, and sprawling military tunnel networks across the region had been poured using materials sourced exclusively from this site. That meant leveling this concrete plant effectively severed their ability to construct hardened defensive structures in the future. Through their AAQ-28 Lightning targeting pods, the F-16 pilots had eyes on the plant's sprawling industrial footprint, covering dozens of acres. Several concrete batching towers reaching over 130 feet into the air dominated the complex, connected by massive metal conveyor systems hauling cement and aggregate between processing zones. The majority of civilian workers had already evacuated the moment the explosions kicked off at Bandar Abbas. However, heavily armed Iranian security forces remained on site, making a futile attempt to defend the installation. At 22:54, the lead pilot's wingman pickled his first 1,000-pound GBU, 32 JDAM, aiming dead center on the primary batching tower. The GBU, 32's warhead, packed with over 440 pounds of tritonal explosive, generated a massive concussive blast designed to shred heavy industrial machinery, electrical grids, and structural steel inside the target zone. Merely seconds after impact, the bomb punched clean through the tower's reinforced concrete shell before detonating deep inside the machinery bay. A towering cloud of pulverized concrete, twisted metal, and steel shrapnel erupted across the compound. The 130-foot tower snapped in half and collapsed violently onto the adjacent buildings, instantly wiping out the plant's primary production capacity. The second and third strikes hunted down the cement storage silos. These colossal tanks held hundreds of tons of raw materials. The detonations tore the silos wide open, unleashing massive choking clouds of cement dust that aggressively mixed with the fire and smoke from the destroyed equipment. Within seconds, the entire industrial sector was transformed into a chaotic, impenetrable zone of smoke and debris. The final strike was reserved for the plant's electrical substation, the lifeblood powering the entire production line. The blast completely obliterated the power grid. Without electricity, whatever equipment managed to survive was rendered totally useless, and restoring operations would require rebuilding the entire industrial infrastructure from the ground up. The pinpoint precision required to snipe these specific components inside a crowded complex while avoiding collateral damage to surrounding civilian infrastructure perfectly showcased the lethality of the JDAM. Even when dropped from extreme standoff distances, their margin of error was a mere 15 feet. By 23:26, the concrete production facility had been erased from the map. This meant Iran had just been stripped of its ability to churn out the specialized materials needed for new, hardened defensive structures. Underground bases and bunkers in the region would, moving forward, be forced to rely strictly on existing, older facilities, which were becoming increasingly vulnerable to follow-on US airstrikes. More importantly, Iran's entire industrial investment in this project was wiped off the board in less than 20 minutes from the moment the attack commenced.